my parents were born in Poland, and they lived in Warsaw. And as a child, my mum was an accomplished pianist. My dad trained as an engineer, and he spoke several languages fluently, and he also served in the Polish army, which he said was tough, but the fact that he could speak languages was helpful to him. They met apparently in some club in Warsaw, and they got married on the 14th of February 1932. Now, my dad came to the United Kingdom, first of all, around about 1931, because my grandfather, that's his father, was already in the United Kingdom and had set up a business in the city, in which he named my father as a director. And the thought was that would help my father come over here, even although my dad, at the time when my grandfather set up the business, was still in Poland. My parents did want to come to the United Kingdom, and the reason is that there was quite a lot of anti-Semitism, which my dad experienced firsthand and said was endemic. And he pointed out that it was the Roman Catholic Church at that time in Poland who were very anti-Semitic. Anyway, my dad came back to the United Kingdom again after he'd been in the Polish army in 1935, and my mum was still in Poland, and on this occasion something was arranged such that because my father was a director of a UK company, he was allowed to stay for a while, and then a year later, in 1936, just before the war, my mum arrived here, which was pretty damn lucky because otherwise they might have been caught up in Poland. Later on in the war, he joined the British Army, which was rather helpful to him when eventually, after the war, they both applied for British nationality. I thought my father was some sort of a hero when I was a young child, and learned that he was in the army and started to learn about the Holocaust in my teens. And I saw him in a way as a hero who, this is an image, who stood on top of the White Cliffs of Dover with a rifle in one hand when he was in the British Army, while with the other hand he formed a fist that he shook at the Nazis across the Channel. I was born in London on the 28th of January 1940, and it was an extremely cold winter, and there was snow on the ground. We lived with my grandparents at 30 Gresham Gardens in Golders Green. Now, Golders Green is on the Northern Line, and our house was not far from the wartime Hendon Aerodrome, both of which were bombed by the German Luftwaffe. And that may explain one of my early memories. First of all, I had a flashback memory in my mind when I recall being in my grandparents' kitchen, sitting on somebody's lap, and there was an extremely large noise and a lot of shaking. That's the memory I have. Anyway, my father told me a story of how when he heard these bomb noises approaching, that he thought one of the bombs would be falling on us, and that what he did was to throw himself over my mother and myself, and we all went on the floor. Now, that may be what actually happened during my flashback, when I said that I recalled sitting on somebody's lap and there was a loud noise and some shaking and a lot of confusion. Well, I was told that apparently some of the adults, and I don't quite know who, got those two siren noises confused. when the siren sounded to indicate danger, going up and down, I was put into the garden in the sunshine. And when the all clear sounded, in other words, the steady noise of the siren, I was quickly put into the Anderson shelter that was in my grandparents' garden. The Blitz had been going for about a month when I was evacuated to Minehead in Somerset. We stayed in lodgings in Minehead with some very nice people, and I was evacuated with my paternal grandparents and my mother, and my father obviously came down to stay with us, but he had the business in London. He had a clothing factory in Farringdon, so he used to go up to London most weekdays and come down and join us on the weekend. So while he was in Minehead, my father joined the local Home Guard. I vividly remember my father bringing a rifle home. I didn't know it was a rifle at the time, but it certainly was. And I didn't know what it was, but my father said to me in a very severe tone, "Don't ever touch this, because it might make a very loud noise and frighten your mother." So I was a bit terrified of this piece of wood with a metal ring and what obviously was the trigger or whatever it was. While in Minehead, my dear sister Vicky was born. She was born on the 18th of June in 1942. And I vaguely remember her suddenly appearing. I've got a lot of memories in Minehead. I was there between October 1940 and I think the end of 1944. Minehead had a wonderful sandy beach, and it was quite shallow, which means that the sea seemed to disappear every day. And I was curious to know where the sea went. So one day I left some dinky toys which I had. I made makeshift garages in the sand with the moist sand, and left them in there. And then I sort of walked off on my own. I'm surprised that none of the adults were watching me to see what I was doing. And I discovered all sorts of things like seaweed and crabs running sideways and goodness knows what shells. And eventually I came to some rather big, to me big, large round balls with spikes on, the metal balls, and they had chains, and I don't know what the heck they were. But what I couldn't understand was why the adults were so angry with me. And I also couldn't understand why all my dinky cars had disappeared under the water. There's another memory I have which is very strong in my mind, when we were walking in the town and I heard a noise in the sky, a whirring sound, and it came whizzing over our heads and disappeared. And of course it was a fighter. I don't know what it was. I couldn't recognize what it was, but it flew very low over the shops towards the sea. There's all sorts of other things I remember in Minehead, like the beautiful crocuses in the park. And I remember one day coming out of the park and my father was marching with his platoon somewhere, I don't know where, probably up the top of the hill there in Minehead. And as I came out of the park, he saw me, and his arms were swinging backwards and forwards as the soldiers do. And I remember that his arms waved. He waved with his hand, not with his arm. He waved with his hand at me and kind of looked over. And lucky for him, the sergeant didn't see any of that. But that was another memory I have. There's all sorts of other things I remember about being on a bicycle and being with my grandma and ice creams and trains and things. This must have been around the time of D-Day, because what I saw on one of the hills was an assembly point for tanks and trucks. And I believe, if I'm correct, and I did look this up, it was on the local Hopcote Road, which is the A39 going west. I saw tanks and trucks and men in uniform all over the place. And of course, I hadn't a clue what any of that was. but it was so different and stunning that it stuck in my memory. I do recall what must have been VE Day in Golders Green. I remember walking there, and there was a lot of people in the streets and a lot of bunting all over the place. And there was on the back of a lorry a screen, and I looked there, and it was a newsreel. You don't see that today, but they were playing the latest news on the back of a truck, which caught my attention.